I will.
Sorry, you may have cut out there. Anyway,
Oh.
yes. Maybe it's worth me rebooting my router. What do you think?
If you think it's on your end, I really honestly
I've got
don't
no
know
idea.
what's
These
going
things are
on in
like
our house.
alchemy to me.
Yeah.
And I'm in IT. Right? Like, look, let me just do that. It'll take like a five, hopefully less than 2 minutes. One
Okay.
second.
Yeah. You want me to just stay on? I'm gonna go for 1 second as well. Do you ever find that things are less stable in that office room?
Okay, I'm back. Okay. All right.
All right.
And I'll introduce them. Now, just as I did speak, are you one of the co-authors of the first article on bioethics?
One of the early articles on neuroethics.
On neuroethics. That's right.
Yeah,
Yeah. Okay.
bioethics goes way back.
Oh yeah, yeah. So, okay. So the neuroethics for a new millennium. Okay, that's right.
Yeah.
So one of that's is that the earliest article on neuroethics?
Um, possibly,
Okay.
possibly the first one to use that term,
Hmm.
but I was not the person who coined that term.
Okay. Well, I'll let you just break that down after I've finished introducing you. Okay. All right. Welcome, everybody. We've got Adina Roskies here, and she's Professor of Philosophy at UC Santa Barbara with affiliations in psychological and brain sciences. and her work sits at the intersection of philosophy, neuroscience, and ethics. Trained in both neuroscience and philosophy, she has held roles including senior editor at Neuron, worked in cognitive neuroimaging, and is also co-author of a primer on criminal law and neuroscience. So Adina is widely recognized for being an early and influential neuroethicist, especially for her 2002 article, Neuroethics for the New Millennium in Neuron, which apparently helped define the fields of neuroethics, if I'm correct. Is that accurate, Adina?
Yeah, I think it was one of the first articles that used the term neuroethics, and I tried to say what I thought neuroethics should be. So, and to some extent, that's what it has become. So, yeah.
Well, officially welcome, Adina.
Thank you.
It's really great to
Nice
have
to be
you on the
here.
show.
Great to be here.
Yes. Thomas Hobbes. Now we've been discussing leviathans and cyborgs on our channel recently. Uh, Thomas Hobbes wrote said, "A free man is he that in those things which by his strength and wit he is able to do, is not hindered or do what he is not hindered do what he has will to do." I think it's meant to be to do what he has will to do. So yeah, yes. So stepping back, the terms free and freedom seem quite natural to humans. They're embodied in law and the Constitution of the US, and people use these words a lot. But what do you mean? What is meant by these words, free and freedom? What they
Well, I
actually
think it
mean?
really depends what the context is. Politically, when we talk about political freedom, we mean a certain kind of liberty to um, live the kinds of lives that we want to live, and um, a certain right to self-determination. But I think you're asking more philosophically, what do we
Mm,
mean when we talk about freedom? Uh, Not so much in law, um, but when we're talking about freedom of the will.
mm,
And um, in in discussions of freedom of the will, I think people are not entirely certain what they mean by freedom, and so part of the kind of philosophical debates that go on about freedom of the will uh, are involved with trying to become clear on what precisely freedom of the will requires. And so I think part of the dispute is that people have different views about what constitutes freedom of the will. Um, my own view is that our folk notions of freedom are incoherent, and so that can't possibly be what we mean when we have serious discussions about freedom of the will. We want something that is at least a possibility to exist, and then there's an empirical question about whether or not that does exist. And so I can say what I mean about that in a little more detail if you want me to. Like,
yes, yeah, definitely. I mean, and to ground this for people who aren't philosophers, who normally go around talking about freedom and free will to describe their everyday life or what rights they might have. Um, yes, it's important that to define these terms, as you began to at the start of this discussion, to separate the folk definitions from the actual, the tight empirical and philosophical scientific definitions. Yes, yes, but yeah, yeah. Please do go on.
yeah, so uh, if you think about intuitions about freedom, usually the question of freedom is often raised alongside the question of whether or not determinism is true of the universe. And I want to just have people think for a moment about what determinism or indeterminism implies. And if you think about your intuitions, I think that it's very common for people to think that if determinism is true, and let me tell you what determinism is. Determinism is the thesis that given the precise state of the world at any particular time, and all the laws of nature, you fix the state of the world at any other time. That is, there's only one possible way that the universe could be given some specification of how it is at some particular time. Um, so there's only one, given that the world is the way it is now, there's only one way that the world could be in the future, for instance. And many people think that if if they think about determinism being true, that rules out alternate possibilities. It makes it seem like you don't have a choice at any moment to do A or B because there's only one way that the universe could evolve. And so it's, I think, very common and understandable that people think determinism is incompatible with free will. On the other hand, our intuitions about free will also have something to do with control. And uh, if indeterminism is true, then there is a random element. And in fact, the world could be more than one way in the future. But the reason that can be more than one way in the future is that there's some element of randomness that makes it the case. So if you think that you can choose between A and B, and the thing that makes you choose B rather than A is some blip in the causal order, so that there's a random event, that also seems inconsistent with free will because you aren't actually controlling the choice that you make. Or you might say it's the randomness and not you that's making the choice, right? And so if it's also the case that either determinism is true or determinism is false. So it's going to be one or the other, and both of those seem inconsistent with free will. Now, it's not just that they're inconsistent. I think that that whole idea of free will, if you take those intuitions as being set in stone, necessarily guiding us to what free will is, I think that the conception of free will is just an incoherent conception. It's not consistent with anything that could possibly exist, and I think people are concerned about whether or not we have free will. They want to know this as an empirical fact, and I think that the way to navigate that is to realize that those intuitions are not foolproof, and that we really have to think more deeply about what free will requires. And so that's where I start. My own view is that we do have free will. At least there's nothing that has suggested to me that we don't have free will, but that free will does not require that we are uncaused causes, which is really what that folk intuition would require. That is not a naturalistically possible thing. And so the part of the philosophical work is to figure out, well, what does free will require and when are those requirements met? And so that's what I'm interested in doing. And for the most part, my contributions to the literature have been focused on looking at least claims from the scientific literature that we have evidence that undermines the notion that we have free will. And I myself think that there is no evidence that we have that gives us any compelling reason to think that we lack free will.
Right. Yes. I get the sense that, at least from my folk point of view, when I thought about free will quite a while ago, I realized I wanted to live in a universe that was predictable and had regularities and wasn't completely just free fuzz, but I wanted to be the free one. I wanted to be this sort of this bubble of freedom where I could, you know, do whatever I wanted and have my choices unbounded or decoupled from the uh, or not constrained by the deterministic nature of the rest of the universe, in a sense.
Yeah.
I don't believe that now, of course, but just to give you a sense of this sort of folk psychology that I think was going on in my head as I began to sort of think about these sorts of things at a young age.
Yeah, I think that many people share that view, but I think if you start thinking hard about that view, it's kind of inconsistent. So, if it is decoupled from the rest of the universe, then what is it itself that governs your choices or makes them choice worthy? So typically, when we want free will, it's because we want to be able to do the kinds of things that we want to do, or um, try to achieve things that we aspire to. Why do we aspire to them? Well, because we value them. Why do we value them? Well, because they have, maybe in the past led to consequences that we also value, but those are causal claims. We value them because of properties that they have, but we only know of those properties because of causal relations. So it makes no sense to actually value free will in a universe where your actions are decoupled by, from the things that you care about. Um, so I think that we need causation. We need to recognize that any kind of free will worth wanting is free will that is sort of compatible with a causal universe. And I think the biggest problem with the folk notion is the notion, the idea that causation is uh, antithetical to free will, right? We want a conception of free will that's consistent with conceptions of causation.
Right. Now, between the two extremes of hard determinism and this, philosophical libertarianism, when I say libertarianism here, I'm not talking about political libertarianism, that's slightly different. So between these two extremes, I believe that you sit in a compatibilist position and think that determinism or indeterminism debate is somewhat orthogonal to the notion of free will. Is that accurate? And if so, how did you come to this notion?
Yeah, let me just clarify. So I don't actually consider libertarianism and hard determinism to be two extremes of the debate because, in fact, they're both incompatibilist views. They're both views saying free will and determinism are not compatible.
Okay.
Hard determinism is the view that free will is incompatible with determinism and determinism is true. And libertarianism is the view that free will is incompatible with determinism and indeterminism is true. But both of those claims, or both of those positions, are taking a stand on the determinism. And to the extent that it's an empirical question, it's not one that science has an answer to, despite what certain scientists have said. I mean, in fact, there are people who are, staking their reputations on claims that determinism has been proven true by science, and others who claim that indeterminism has been proven true by science. And I just think that science has shown neither to be the case. And certainly, I don't think neuroscience has the ability to show either to be the case. Um, so uh, there is a view, which is a compatibilist view, and that just denies the incompatibility and determinism. The claim is not that determinism is compatible, but rather that just that free will is compatible with determinism. So I'm a compatibilist. I don't know whether determinism is true true. But I think that the positive story about free will is not going to hinge on whether or not determinism is true, provided that other conditions are satisfied. And I think the hard part of that story is to give an account of what those other conditions are. And just to sort of gloss my view, I think that organisms or agents have to have certain kinds of capacities in order to count as having free will. I also don't think that free will requires that you always act freely or that you can do everything that you want to do. We know that that's not true. Um, there are things that we might want that we can't achieve, and that I don't think undermines the notion that we have or act for our own free wills. Um, but I can't decide to freely will myself to fly by flapping my arms. It's just not going to work. But that isn't the kind of thing that ever bothered anyone about the question of free will. The question is, are we ever free? Not, and we do everything that we might want to do. Um, so, uh, so the position that I take is that free will is compatible with determinism. It is possible that indeterminism is the a fundamental truth of the universe. I don't think that undermines our ability to have free will, provided that it operates, at a certain level that is essentially below the threshold to undermine the kind of control that we need to have in order to consider ourselves to have free will. So free will requires a certain kind of control over our own actions, and also a certain kind of control over our uh-oh, did we have a connection problem?
Yeah, I've been noticing you dropping out. Now, I'll just remember to cut this little discussion out. But yeah, I think that Riverside will cache all the video that you're creating and eventually upload it anyway. There might be breaks in my interpretation of what you're saying because I don't get all of it.
Okay.
But I think I get the gist of what you're saying.
Okay. Well, how much did you miss?
I only missed the last 15 seconds or the last 10
Yeah.
seconds. Yeah.
Okay. Um,
Yeah.
I don't know if
Did you?
there's a better fit with a computer,
Yeah.
but
One thing you can do, and this is, you probably don't have the capacity to do this, and that is the router might be far away, too far for video. There's also the possibility of plugging in a Cat5 cable to the Ethernet port in your laptop going to the router, which allows for more stable internet, sort of video call. But yeah, that's usually people.
yeah.
Usually, it's not a problem. But yeah, it's one of those things.
Yeah.
Do you normally do video calls from this computer at that position in the house?
I usually do it at the dining room table, but um, that's
Could
not
be chaotic.
occupied at the moment,
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, and the router is in a closet, so that would be difficult.
Mm. Yep. Yeah. That's fine. Okay. So let's just like push on here for the moment, anyway.
Okay.
So yes. Now I guess people are wondering. Well, Okay, well, what if free will? What about compatibilism? How does this new view, more nuanced view, may take quite a lot of energy to sort of process this in my mind? Why is that important for people in general? How does somebody ground this more compatibilist view in what's important for them in everyday life? Maybe it's something to do with how they sort of trust science news, or how they think about our evolving relationship to a highly deeper and deeper, more technological society is as a technology and AI and various high impact technologies emerge on the horizon, what it means for them and what it means for the future.
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Yeah, that was kind of
Um,
like a riff. Okay, so yeah, I mean, like, how do you think if people are looking at this compatibilist view, and it might have quite a lot of moving parts for them, why is it important for them if they're not going to just dismiss it because it might not matter to them in their everyday life? Why should they take the idea seriously?
um, well, for people who are bothered by the fact that, well, I won't call it fact, but bothered that they think determinism is true and that rules out free will, I think they should realize that we don't know that determinism is true, but more importantly, that determinism doesn't rule out free will. And I think it requires a kind of gestalt shift to be able to see that even if there's one way that the universe will evolve, it is not predetermined that the universe will evolve that way. What determines that the universe evolves that way is what you choose or what you do. And uh, so essentially, the unfolding of the universe is a function of your agency, which is, I think, what we want from free will, right? We want our agency to be operative, to be effective. And so it's in virtue of the choices you make that the universe becomes the universe that it is. Uh, Now, then the skeptic says, well, but it's not really a choice because you made the choice bound by the laws of nature. But um, I think that's the part that requires the gestalt shift, yeah, to look for a kind of freedom that violates the laws of nature seems to me to be, sort of a fool's errand. Um, what you want is a kind of credible account of the kind of control that is consistent with the laws of nature, but that the agent can exercise over the way in which the future unfolds. And that I think is possible to give that kind of account.
If indeterminism were to help, what exact neuroscientific conditions, and maybe you can get into this more deeply later, but what neuroscientific conditions would make it agency enhancing rather than just mere luck?
I don't think that it's agency enhancing, so I'm not going to be able to give you a story. What indeterminism provides you is a way of understanding how there are how the future can be open, and uh, I think once you have the kind of compatibilist view that I'm advocating for, that question becomes unimportant, really. It's not a requirement of freedom that the universe be open. But the requirement has more to do with the relationship between uh, characteristics of you, the agent, and the way in which your actions unfold. So, I think, is it possible that indeterministic events occur in the nervous system? Yes, I think it's quite possible. Is it possible that they occur in a way that macroscopically affects the way the universe unfolds? I think that it's plausible. Quantum mechanics suggests that at least for the most part, a lot of these indeterministic blips would wash out at the macroscopic level, but I can imagine ways in which they could make a difference to a decision. I think that what we care about when we think about our choices is whether the decisions we come to are caused by and accurately reflect the kinds of values we have, the people we are, our past history, etc. Related to previous events. So, so I think we can act freely even if there is a little slop in the system, because for the most part, I don't think that our decisions really sort of sit on the knife edge. But to the extent that the decision itself is dependent on, one atom sort of, changing, one particle changing state or something that would be sort of a candidate for the kind of indeterminism that physics might ultimately ratify. I don't think that that is going to make the difference about whether we think our actions are freely willed or not.
I guess a lot of my subscribers are interested in how this debate, how this notion of compatibilism might transpose into AI, right? So do you think AI in its current state or in a future state might be might have affordances of the same kinds of free will that we do, or something similar, or even more so?
It's hard for me to know what this could be like. I'm skeptical that current AIs even count as agents. I don't think until they have what I think of as more full-blown agentive capacities, it isn't clear to me that there's anything like free will that can be attributed to them. Likewise, mental states, for instance, or values or desires. It's not even clear to me that they've got, a semantics that hooks up with our lived world in the right kind of way at this point. But if you ask me, is such a thing possible? Yeah, I think there's no reason to think that there couldn't be artificial intelligences that have properties of agency, that have the kinds of capacities that I think are necessary for free will. I just don't think that our current AIs have those things.
Yes, so it seems as though the most widely recognized ones, LLMs, for instance, are very much event-based, and they only really respond to you when you interact with them. And then there's this event-based architecture and loops, and a variety of, there's agentic capacities that AIs are being sort of that have, or we're being told that that's what they have,
I
like
think there's
OpenClaw and all those sorts of things. But that's not really the same as the kind of agency that you were talking about here, is it?
done in saying more about what constitutes agency, what constitutes the kind of unity or integral or integration of capacities that makes something an agent. So just the fact that we as agents can be affected by the output of an AI doesn't make us part of that AI. I don't know that we do have a well worked out notion of what kind of unity is required to make something act as an agent. But and I think that's an interesting question both for AI and for philosophy of mind. But I would say that none of the LLMs have either agency in the ability to act on the world, or the kind of metacognitive capacities that we and many other animals have that are, I think, essential for uh, are you there?
Yes, I yeah, I'm here.
Okay.
Yes, I'm not
Would you
sure
like
what's
me
going on.
to maybe I'll let me see if I can move to another location and maybe that will turn out to be better, but I'm not particularly optimistic about it.
Yeah, that's fine.
Um, oh, Colin is gone, so that's
Yeah, I got to interview one of his collaborators on the moral Turing test, the comparative moral Turing test stuff just recently. He spoke at an event that I organised as well.
is that AL?
Yeah, A.L. Haroni, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Let me just give me 1 second. I take it you're gonna chop this out anyway, yeah?
Yes, correct. Yeah, yeah,
So let
yeah, yeah.
me shut the door and hopefully that'll work better.
Yeah, okay.
I'm gonna shut the door. I'm moving in the hopes that I have freezing. Oh, you are too? Ugh. Okay, that's bad. I, th- I think we have like seriously bad luck with uh, these recording sessions because Colin said he's also having connection issues and he's not even. So it could be the service, but we just got um, fiber optic service that shouldn't be interrupted.
Hmm. Yeah,
Anyway,
right. So there's a bunch of things that can be done. Like one of them is, of course, rebooting the router. The other one is turning off the the fiber optics box or unplugging it for like a while and then plugging it in again, and that might magically do something. I mean, like it could have something to do with on their
Magic.
end. I don't know. Yeah, well, that's my description for stuff I don't understand.
Right.
So, so did you finish the thoughts on the previous question? Do you think?
I thought I did, yeah.
Yeah, cool. All right. So, yeah, I'll I'll review it when I'm editing, but I'm sure it'll be fine. Now,
Yeah.
you wrote so let's start from where we left off. So now you were contributor or the lead author, is that correct, in influential paper, What is the Intention to Move and When Does it Occur? Now, yes, do you want to give us a brief overview of what that paper was about, what this study was about, and what the findings were?
Um, well, that was actually a kind of meta analysis and review paper, so it wasn't so much a paper that had novel findings.
Okay.
It just really showed that the literature on the RP was kind of a mess, and that many of the constructs that it refers to are pretty unreliable. You know, the measurements are unreliable, and uh, the arguments that the RP shows that we lack free will are highly questionable. And I
Now,
think
RP
the
stands for
better
readiness
the
potential, right?
readiness potential,
Bereitschaft. I can't.
Bereitschaft potential.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think a better article was one that I wrote with Aaron Scherger that came out in Trends in Cognitive Sciences that um, I think its title is "What is the Readiness Potential?" and um, and that paper really does make an argument that the way in which the Libet experiments have been interpreted is completely mistaken, and it offers an alternative interpretation based on some computational modeling of decision making that is actually shows that the data is completely consistent with a much more intuitive notion of free will. That is, that our volitions, our decisions, and our awareness of our decisions occur approximately at the same time and before we move, and that there is no evidence that our brains decide before we do. So, if you want, I can go back and give a little bit of background on the Libet studies because
Yeah. I mean, Libet used something called W time, and you know, it was a bit malleable as far as I understand the concept of what W time was. So, yeah, do you want to give us a brief background into the Libet experiments and the moving parts?
yeah. So the Libet experiments, I think, are probably one of the most well-known, popular um, popular sciency neuroscientific studies that are relevant to the problem of free will. And what Libet showed, first of all, what Libet relied on was a finding that preceded him, made by Kornhuber and Dieck, that if you have somebody spontaneously move their finger, move their wrist, you're recording from the scalp, that prior to the movement, you can see brain potential, which they term the readiness potential, that reliably preceded movements. And what Libet did was he investigated the RP, but related it to what he calls the W time, which was the time at which a person is conscious of willing to move. And so we had known that there was this readiness potential preceding movement. What Libet added is that the readiness potential begins before the person is aware of having decided to move. And his interpretation was that the brain decides before you do, or your conscious volition is not actually the thing making you move. Your unconscious decision is making you move, and you just become aware of that later on in the process. But it sort of put conscious will off to the side, ineffective in controlling action. And that's why it was considered to be a challenge to the possibility of free will. So there's been, quite a bit of work on the readiness potential, and it is a signal that you can reliably get when people are making spontaneous movements. So there's nothing in question about the ability to see that signal from the brain, but what's important is to understand the way in which that signal is acquired. And so what people do is they measure EEG, so electrical potentials from the scalp, and they also measure EMG, so you can tell when the person is moving their finger. And if you take an epoch of the EEG activity that surrounds the moment at which a person moves, and you take many of these epochs, which are very noisy electrical signals, and you average them together, time locking them to the point at which the person makes the movement, that's when you see the RP. So the RP requires the averaging over many, many trials of these noisy signals. But once you do that, you see this slow ramping potential prior to movement. The thing that is important to recognize, and I don't think people made very much of it until recently, is that what you're doing when you acquire data that way is you're sampling only from the epochs in which somebody moves. And because you're time locking each of those epochs to the point of movement, if somebody's not moving, you don't use that data. And so you're taking a rather biased sample of data. And what the paper that I was telling you about argues is that modern computational models of decision making are so if you think that what is happening when somebody is deciding to move their finger spontaneously, and I should also just say as an aside that these are very weird experiments to be a subject in, to have somebody to be instructed to spontaneously move without planning, just whenever you feel the urge, move your finger, but at the same time try to note when you become aware of having this urge or making the decision to move. That's a very unnatural task. We are typically not metacognitively monitoring our awareness of our decisions to move. And if you think, though, that what is going on is that there's some kind of decision process being entrained each time you're deciding, should I move now or like when is it that I'm ready to move? There has to be something that's causing you eventually to move. If you think that what's causing you is a decision process, then as a matter of mathematical certainty, if you time lock all these decision processes to the point of movement, you're going to get exactly what an RP looks like. That is, what you're looking at when you look at the RP is the effect of having a decision process run to completion. Now that's completely consistent with our folk intuitions of what's going on when we decide to do something. There's some kind of neural process that allows us to make a decision. And what the decision model shows, though, is that the RP doesn't, it's a mistake to think that the RP starts at the point at which it deviates from some baseline value. The RP is evidence of the existence of a decision process, but the decision isn't made at the beginning of that process. The decision is made at the end of that process. And so the decision occurs right before you actually make the movement. And you are aware of that decision around that time also, right? So the way in which the RP was identified and measured mistakenly pointed to a time well prior to the movement for when the decision has been made, whereas the decision model has sort of the decision comes late in that RP, right before the movement, and so your awareness of moving is approximately when you actually are moving, right? So it completely undermines the idea that conscious volition is inefficacious. In fact, it shows that your consciousness of having decided occurs approximately at the time that you seem to have decided.
So there's famous proponents of the no free will sort of idea, like Sam Harris and Robert Sapolsky, who you may have, I don't know if you've ever met them, but you may be aware of their stuff, right? Now,
Yes.
so they might argue that, oh yes, we know that the specific Libet-style experiments, measuring readiness potential before conscious awareness, are not perfect. But they believe that the overall implication of this study, that the unconscious brain actively drives actions before we are aware of them, they think that that's the solid part of the argument against free will.
Yes.
So they might contend that criticisms regarding the experiment's simplicity don't save the concept of free will, as all behaviours are ultimately determined by prior neurological and biological causes. So if you were in a room with them and you had time to discuss with them about the details of what's really going on, how would you approach the discussion with somebody like Robert Sapolsky, for instance?
So, I mean, I think Robert Sapolsky never. Robert is very convinced that determinism is true. He has lots of evidence that many causal factors affect our cognition, and I completely agree that many causal factors affect our cognition. In fact, I do not at all deny that causation is important in cognition. He, I think, is philosophically blind to the idea of compatibilism. I think he just thinks if determinism is true, then there is no free will, and cannot wrap his head around compatibilism, which, I think it is a very subtle notion. I mean, they're sort of flat-footed versions of compatibilism that are not very satisfactory. I agree, but I think there are more sophisticated versions of compatibilism that, for whatever reason, Robert does not find compelling, but he also doesn't really engage with them. And I would say the same for Sam Harris, but I think Sam Harris also just buys the Libet experiments hook, line, and sinker. He has a very uncritical attitude towards the Libet experiments. So it would be, I'd be interested in hearing whether he rethinks that part of his position. But again, I think that what he thinks free will requires is for agents to be uncaused causes, and I agree that that's not a good target. I just think that there is a good compatibilist target.
So yeah, what? Okay, so let's talk about the veto stuff. I mean, like maybe Sam Harris might say that Libet's own idea of a conscious veto, the ability to stop an argument, he might argue that this decision is itself another preceding unconscious event and not a free act. So what is it about this, okay, stuff beginning in, or at least partly beginning in the subconscious mind, which they argue softens the argument for free will or compatibilism?
Um, I there are certainly unconscious causes of conscious processes, right? All these things are intertwined, and we are not conscious of everything that's going on in our brains. I think it's a big mistake to think that free will requires that we are conscious of everything going on in our brains. I think free will is a much more outwardly directed thing. We're thinking about the world and we're thinking about our actions. So I don't think that the fact that there are unconscious processes um, so uh, so Libet originally thought, well, our brains decide before we do, but in the window between our brain's decision and our action, maybe we could veto our brain's decision, and that would sort of restore some free will. But it turns out that that's a non-starter, in part because not doing something or vetoing something is also dependent on a decision process, which also takes time. There is a point at which, once you've initiated an action, things are going to sort of carry on before you can inhibit them. So I don't think the idea of a veto power saving free will is the right strategy for a kind of compatibilist point of view. I think the right strategy is to just recognize that the studies that claim to provide evidence that our brains decide before we do are misinterpretations of the data. And we are consciously aware, or at least there's nothing to undermine our notion that we are consciously aware of our decisions as we make them. I think another thing to note, though, is that there's a difference between being consciously aware of what you are doing when you're doing it and being explicitly aware of being conscious. Most of the time, we don't go through our life saying, "Oh, I'm conscious of this now, and I'm conscious of that now, and I'm conscious of the other thing now." That's a level of metacognition that's different than sort of our everyday agency in the world. And what the kind of W time experiments are asking are um, these sort of higher order metacognitive level awareness, like, oh, I'm aware of making a decision now. Typically, we just consciously make decisions, and sometimes we unconsciously make decisions. When we're doing things that are very habitual, we can do a variety of things without consciously initiating them. But that, again, does not undermine our capacity for free will. And it's not even clear that it undermines our free will. So um, I think that you can freely will things, even if they're unconsciously willed. I think it becomes problematic if the things that you're willing are things that are, things that you would repudiate if you were aware of them. But typically, that's not what we're doing.
Yeah, I was thinking, I wonder what either of Sam Harris or Robert Sapolsky would say to, a thought experiment where a machine was built with all the right architecture for what we claim to be free will. Like they had complete introspection 100% of the time. They were always, in system two thinking. They weren't ever in system one thinking, the Kahneman Tversky sort of thinking fast and slow, system one and two style thinking stuff. That's what I'm referring to. Imagine it were possible to create a machine that could observe every single thought, every single process that was going on in its mind, including the observation process. Assuming that all the right pieces were in place from a compatibilist point of view, I wonder if they would say that then this machine would have free will. I guess maybe Sapolsky wouldn't because he thinks the universe is hard determined. But I wonder if Sam Harris could be sort of lured across the line.
Yeah, I guess I would like to hear from uh, both of them what the positive view of free will is.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a physically possible, uh, coherent positive view that we don't
Yeah,
have. Yeah.
right. Yeah. And whether a machine or, an organism could, in principle, be realized in this universe to actually do that. It doesn't require like an organism more complex than the universe itself to do that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure your thought experiment is sort of logically coherent, right? If you're requiring that the system have complete introspective access to everything that's happening in the system, including the system of introspective access, it seems like then you need another layer, and then you want that to be completely introspectively accessible. Um, I'm not sure that is a logically coherent
Yeah. As I was saying that,
specification.
I had troubles sort of
Yeah.
with that part as well. But understanding the code, not real time, like, because you get a computational explosion, I guess, if you're having an observer observing every single aspect of the process of observing. Yes, that's true. Maybe a compressed, filtered, view of that process, but otherwise it might be just, impossible. Right.
So I think no matter what system you conceive of, there's always going to be elements of that system that are not transparent to the system.
Okay.
And I think that's a design requirement. Um, and so the fact that we have that kind of thing in and of itself, I don't think disqualifies us from being agents that could possibly freely will things. I mean,
Yes. While
there.
we're yeah, okay, sorry, sorry. While we're on the subject, I've been thinking about the notion of mechanistic interpretability in, of AI, where we can use, you know, we can interpret what's going on inside a neural net. We can't do it well now, but it seems as though at some point in the future, it may be possible to be able to read the neural connections, all the circuits, all the weights, um, such that you'd be able to read a mind. Um,
So are you talking about brains, or are you talking
oh well,
about
yes,
artificial systems right now?
yes. So I'm talking about artificial systems, but I don't
Yeah.
see why it wouldn't be possible to do it with brains as well.
Uh,
In theory, that a smart enough and agent with a good enough algorithm should be able to read the neural pathways in a brain, or read a neural net of an artificial mind to know what it's thinking, in a sense, to have I guess an external introspection as to what's really going on. Maybe not in real time, but
mm.
you might be able to interpret like a frame. But this idea of radical interpretability, how far do you think that could actually go in assuming we had reasonably unbounded access to computational power and super intelligence to be able to sort of interpret everything?
So again, I'm not sure whether we're talking about brains or artificial systems, but I think that even now we have the network specification and the weights of the system. We just don't know how to interpret what those mean. That's where the interpretability goes wrong. It's not that we can't get the weight, the numerical values of the weights in the system. It just is nonsense to us without tools that allow us to interpret what those patterns of weights are actually doing in any given
Correct.
computation. Um, and so the interpretability problem is a much more conceptual problem than a firepower problem. And I do think we're developing new tools and methods for trying to understand that. But given the size of those networks, it's, not clear to what extent we're going to have a comprehensive view of what's going on, or any kind of system with which to interpret what's going on that we ourselves can understand. With respect to the brain, I think it's an entirely different issue. So there is no part of the software where the anatomical structure is specified, that you can read it off. And in order to get the weights, you actually have to record from the individual neurons, which you can't do with any kind of technology that we have, without seriously creating insult to the hardware. So I don't think that there's any kind of nearby future in which we're going to be able to read brains at the level that you would need to read in order to have the same kind of access that we do to artificial neural networks. But that said, we already have methods that can give us some insight into what's going on. We have, functional MRI, and we have now ways of decoding signals that map in a very rough way to content related uh, structures, semantic structures, or sort of visual uh, maps, things like that. But the kind of degree of precision of those kinds of measurements is like very, very, very far from what you would need to really figure out what's going on in any number of neural systems. So, I think actually to the extent that we can draw analogies between what's going on in neural network research and brains, um, the extra access that we have in understanding these artificial neural networks might give us real insight into the kinds of processes that are operative in brains, because we're not going to get that from direct recordings.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yeah. Yes, it does. It's quite invasive, the kinds of technology that we have at the moment that we'd need in order to read a mind. Although they have done some pretty interesting stuff with BCIs hooking into, the visual the vision part of the brain of cats or other animals. Yeah, I was
Even
quite surprised. Yeah.
even humans, yeah, you can.
And humans these days,
Yeah.
right? Yeah. Mm. Okay, well, I mean, I suppose at some stage, in the long-term future, radical interpretability might be possible in machines and maybe even humans if we have some kind of like amazing pixie dust nanotechnology that can get in
There you
there
go.
inside, right? Yeah, yeah.
Right.
But look, this is, as you said, there's no nearby future where we can expect this kind of thing to be realized. But I think it's interesting to the thought experiment of, if we did have such a kind of machine or a kind of process that enabled real-time access to all the salient features in the brain that computes um, free will,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think it would look like?
That's really not a fair question.
Go on, have a dig. No, no, that's fine. It is. It's a
um,
yeah. What are your intuitions? I mean, yeah, yeah. What are your intuitions then?
well, I mean, my intuitions are it would be like most of the brain that
Hmm.
you would need to have a handle on motivational processes and inhibitory processes and memory capacity and uh, you know what reward value attributions look like to various representations, and what plans look like, how instrumental reasoning works. I mean, I think that's why I prefer to talk in terms of capacities, because we're so far from having any kind of mechanistic explanation of what underlies those kinds of capacities. But we have a lot of evidence that we have those capacities.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, so I don't think that, um, you know, there's going to be some future neurotechnology that will, pinpoint some tiny location in the brain, and if it, has a signal of over five, free will be present. I don't think that it's
Yeah.
going to reduce to anything that looks uh, simple and binary. It's going to be a whole interconnected web of different kinds of systems that have to be in place in order for us to be able to do the kinds of things that we do. Um,
Yeah. Right.
I wish
So
I could tell you more, but
well,
I.
yeah. So I just want to know: have we covered off all the moving parts that your um, your study or meta study pins down? Like, we've done W time, we've done like, the Borscht or the readiness potential. Um, what else is there? Well, we've spoke about veto or
Yeah.
veto effects and free won'ts. But what other moving parts do you think are they're important to sort of describe here?
I think those are the main elements of really what it is a critique of the Libet critiques of free will, right? Um, so it is not a positive view of what free will requires. It's just a interpretation that shows that the classic Libet interpretations are mistakes. Um, and there still is a big, uh, sort of open space. So even if you assume that what's going on when we're making decisions to move our finger spontaneously uh, is a decision process, there's a whole lot more you want to know about it. Um, like, what are the parameters? What kinds of control do we have over those parameters? So, um, you know, presumably I can decide how quickly or what's the threshold for passing or the threshold at which a decision is made, and how malleable is that, and what kinds of higher order processes can control that malleability, and what other kinds of factors can feed in. And so any story about free will is going to involve a lot of um, sort of dynamical, uh, you know, the term often used is reentrant processes, but you know, loops of feedback within the organism that um, allows higher level thoughts and values and motivations and all kinds of things to control a lot of the lower level parameters.
Hmm. We have our folk definitions to describe what processes are going on inside our bodies and minds, like stuff like urges and wantings and decisions and intentions. Are these like dissociable? Like in terms, are they neurally dissociable in terms of brain states, or are they just like folk definitions that don't actually capture ground truths? Um, yeah, so there's a question about whether all these things like urging and wanting and decisions and intentions have separate states in the brain
Mm-hmm.
that are, quite watertight or somewhat watertight, or they all sort of intermingled.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's maybe a somewhat watertight to not very watertight, depending on what we're talking about. But that's a very unresolved area of neurophilosophy. Is do we even have things like beliefs and desires? Are those natural kind terms of any sort?
Mm.
And I would say that nobody really knows what a belief looks like in the brain. Um, maybe we have some kind of understanding of what some contents of some beliefs might look like, but what makes it a belief, I would say nobody really knows at this point. Um, I think there are reasons to think that there are distinctions that are, you know, worth being made at, levels of urges versus wants. Um, but they're not necessarily neurally inspired. Um, So I think that there will be, sort of broad, kind of broad level overlaps with some of our folk psychological terms, but that a lot of them are going to blend into each other. There's not going to be clear boundaries, and some of them may not map at all into. I mean, so, our understanding of the brain may not map at all into these kind of folk psychological terms at some levels. So, a lot of unknown stuff there.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I think in essentially no case are we talking about little discrete representations that are going to be trafficked around. I think we're talking about interactions of big systems, uh, you know, circuits interacting with other circuits, not like neurons, individual neurons or individual brain regions.
I watched a few episodes of Closer to Truth. I think Robert Lawrence Kuhn was the guy who was interviewing you. He seems like if I remember correctly, he's quite much leaning libertarian, philosophical libertarianism. Is that correct? I'm not sure if I'm categorizing him correctly, but yeah.
I would actually have to defer to you because I have never watched those after recording them, and that was a long time ago.
Yeah. Well, they were good interviews, and yeah. So, all right. So, what are okay? So, what are common mistakes do you think that philosophical libertarians are really making when they're, thinking about free will, or when, especially in your personal experiences and having these conversations with people? What have you found people most commonly fall? What bias or misconception are people most commonly falling prey to? Sorry, that was a
Yeah.
long-winded question.
Well, so I think the libertarian view that I find most compelling is Robert Kane's view. And Kane has a whole story about what happens when you make choice, that they're sort of poised on this knife edge and you can't make a decision. And then what happens is there's some indeterministic event that sort of tips the balance in favor of one thing over the other thing. And then he has an entire story of why the decision is still yours and you endorse it, and a whole kind of well worked out story about what makes you identify with that decision and take it as your own. And the thing that always struck me about his view is that he's essentially giving a compatibilist story. Like, all of the things that make it a story of why this is free will are the things that a compatibilist can say. It's because it's based in your character. It's because you wanted it. It's because you, after the fact, also endorse it. And it goes on and on, in terms of the kinds of things that compatibilists can say. And the only element of his story that's incompatibilist is that little knife, what happens when you're on the knife edge and indeterminism occurs. And he never, I never had an opportunity while he was alive. He's died not too long ago, to try to convince him that that little bit just can't possibly be the thing that makes the difference. But he's so committed to the necessity of there being real metaphysical alternative possibilities, in the future. And I think that commitment is so common to libertarians, that it's what drives them to be libertarians, even if everything that sort of substantiates their story for free will is completely consistent with a compatibilist account. And I think, that you should just give that up. That little bit doesn't matter, because if it does anything, it takes away from it being the decision that you make and you control. And I think better to recognize that it's, it's in virtue of your choices, that the universe comes to be the universe that it is, rather than having this, I don't want to say it's a fiction, because it may be, in fact, that we live in an indeterministic universe, but that can't be the fulcrum of the position, it seems to me.
Yeah. So I guess, I mean, people can just put randomness there, and, people can say, well, what the free will part of the mind is doing is just, I don't know, ranking and prioritizing potential random effects. I don't know. There's some kind of like algorithmic sort of process that makes sense of, or does something with, random noise that allows them to, escape a predator, like, coin toss events. If
But
you're escaping, yeah,
yeah,
if you're a bunny running around away from a fox, if you're always doing exactly the same thing, the fox will catch you. But if there's some kind of like a coin flip thing that you're managing in your mind somehow to avoid the predator, then you're more likely to escape.
yeah. But notice you don't have to be random, you have to be unpredictable. And it's
Yeah.
easy to get unpredictability in a deterministic world with a chaotic process. And even in our computer models of random things, the random number generator is not truly random. It's algorithmic. So you don't need actual randomness, and which is one of the reasons why I think science is not going to give us an empirical answer to the question of determinism, because what we perceive as random could be deterministic.
Yeah.
So another way of saying this is that what you need is unpredictability, and we certainly have that. We are complex enough systems that we are unpredictable, at least in certain respects, and that's the need for the biological.
Yeah, I've got a friend who's got his own
Requirement.
mind, own ideas about consciousness, and he thinks that this coin flip event is sort of mediated by some kind of quantum randomness going on. So, yeah, it doesn't have to be like, a random seed algorithm in a classical von Neumann architecture. It can be tapping into something more fundamentally random about the universe.
It could be, but it needn't be, and we can't determine which it is merely from the observation of unpredictability. That's my point. It's that epistemically we are in the same position, whether it's metaphysical indeterminism or just chaotic, unpredictable behavior that is fundamentally deterministic. So, and I think that's all you need, right? So, what if we are deterministic systems that are unpredictable, not just to others, but even to ourselves? I think that's sufficient. Certainly, it's sufficient to generate the kinds of behaviors that we see, but I also think that it shouldn't matter to somebody like Kane whether what's operative is some deterministic system that has that function or a truly indeterministic system. But to Kane, it really does matter. He cares. Or
Yeah.
cared.
Yeah. So it may be really difficult for us to actually measure the difference between a quantum random number generator and like a classical computing based random number generator. I don't know how you could tell other than look at inspecting the process at which these different approaches produce a random number. Yeah, yeah, it's
Right.
interesting.
You need to have, I mean, the interesting thing about these chaotic systems is that you can't reverse engineer them. So you can see that the behavior they produce is chaotic if you're given the governing equations, but you can't go from observing the behavior to deriving the governing equations.
Yes.
And that's so no matter what empirical, at least my claim is, no matter what empirical studies you do looking at the system, because nobody gives us the governing equations of the universe, we're not in a position to make that distinction merely from empirical investigation.
One of the things that struck me when reading this paper was, well, I think I'd encountered this before, but just rethinking these things, the idea that intentions aren't punctuated singular events. They feel as though they are, in a sense, often, I guess. So, yeah, I mean, that's pretty profound for me when I'm thinking about what I choose to do. And I think about, well, my choice isn't like a singular one thing. It's a whole sort of train or whole complex process, whole dynamic that's going on inside my mind. So yeah, the idea that intentions are immediate catalysts or a distillation over many neural events over time is very interesting.
Which
If
paper are
I've got,
you referring
well,
to?
I think the
I just
one that you wrote, right?
I've written many papers.
What is the intention to move and when does it occur?
Okay, that paper. Yeah, I mean, I think our word intention is ambiguous between, uh, a plan that's, a long range commitment to do something or an immediate motor plan that unfolds when we actually do something. I think decision is a little clearer. I mean, there's a process of decision and there's a threshold at which a decision is made. And if you want to call that, crossing of the threshold, the decision point, that's a moment or, at least a fairly restricted event. But many times when we're talking about intentions, I mean, you might think I've got many intentions. Many of them are not things I'm actively thinking about, but like I have an intention to pick my son up from school later today, and up until a second ago, it wasn't something that I was conscious of having, but it's sort of there's some latent plan there that at a certain point in the afternoon will start pushing its way forward. So I just think our way of speaking about intention and volition and those kinds of terms are loose, and they play many different roles. So they don't map clearly onto any event.
Yeah, so yes, that's right. So sometimes maybe part of my intentions, or probably most of the time, are is subconscious. My intentions are partly the process that creates them is partly subconscious, and some of it might be conscious, and maybe different parts of that process may be conscious at some points, or but maybe unconscious at other points. So you spoke about picking your son up from school. We use the intention word to sort of describe both the sort of latent planning thing that's going on, but also the system to thinking about I want to do that, and putting it in a calendar. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And
Mm.
also, I mean, I'm intentionally reaching for this object,
Mm.
and I consciously reached for the object, but I also I intentionally grasped the object, but I don't think that I was conscious of exactly how widely my fingers were spaced when I did it. But,
Mm.
that's all part of the the plan. It's, some of it unfolds unconsciously, some of it unfolds consciously.
Are there specific terms to sort of describe the different kinds of intentions that people have in neuroscience, for instance, or psychology?
Um, I mean, people talk about motor intentions. People talk about, I mean, in philosophy, there's a distinction between proximal intention, which is intention to, do something now, which kind of bleeds into these motor intentions, and distal intentions, which are intentions now to do things later. And uh, um, I think people who study the motor system have lots of different ways of talking about the way in which neurons encode joint angles and things like that that are part of what the unfolding of a motor program is, but I don't necessarily get intention type terms.
Mm. Yeah. I mean, like I wonder whether it would be useful for these kinds of terminologies to be sort of, I guess, added to common day vocabulary. I mean, there's a lot of loan words that have been borrowed from all different cultures and different traditions that have now graduated to common use. And we think about, as humans, we think about intentions a lot, but it seems like our everyday vocabulary is quite blunt. It's not as surgical as what might be useful if we had access to the right terminology.
Yeah, it's interesting to contemplate.
Mm.
I'm not entirely certain. I mean, I tend to think that our language use is largely, or the language that we use is largely suited to the tasks that we use it for. And as the task demands change, we can augment the language fairly easily, but it's not necessarily better. I have in mind Paul Churchland's eliminativist view, where he thinks, or he at least makes the argument that we could eliminate all kinds of folk psychological terms in favor of the neuroscientific terms that map onto them. And so, I could talk about my pleasure at watching the sunset by talking about the dopamine levels rising as my red photoreceptors are activated by light of, 530 nanometers, et cetera, et cetera. And I wonder whether that's an improvement for the things that, we care about for everyday life. Um, I don't I don't have a strong view about it. I'm
Yeah.
I have been pulled towards eliminativism in my lifetime,
Mm.
um, but yeah,
A
it's not
limitivist
clear.
poetry. That'd be nice. Maybe we
Yeah,
can spawn a new branch of research. Poetic
a way of
eliminativism. Nice.
that's right. There you go. That's a way of bridging the STEM and the humanities.
Hmm.
Uh, could write a
Yeah.
grant to the NEH.
Yeah. I'm sure they'll be very impressed. So, yeah. Look, maybe it's you've spoken a lot about the different components, the moving parts now. Let me think of what the good question next would be. Um, uh, Let
Why
me
does
just
it
fire some
matter?
questions at you. Or have you got any ideas of where to move from here?
Oh, well, I was gonna say, well, why does any of this matter? But
Hmm. Yeah. Okay. Well. All right. Let's. Yeah. Because that follows on from the conceptual clarity that we've been discussing. So yes. Why does any of all this matter? Thanks for the prompt.
well, I think it matters for a variety of reasons. One reason, obviously, is that we want to understand our place in the universe, and that's one of the reasons that philosophy is so compelling. Um, and yeah, I believe that understanding our place in in the universe through a naturalistic lens is important and healthy and doesn't lose things that we care about. So in that way, I think I'm quite in line with Paul Churchland's view. Um, but you might think, there are also important application questions. So, um, why does it matter? Well, because we live in a society in which we hold people accountable. And I think there are real problems with thinking that people don't have free will and nobody is responsible for anything. And so that's one reason that many people do care about the question of free will, because it does intersect with our everyday lives and the way in which we treat people. Um, and while I think that we have what we need in order to hold people accountable and make sense of our practices of uh, punishment and blame, and um, design our legal systems in ways that are, sort of reasonably responsive to those sorts of things. You might also think that our legal systems are not, optimally designed in that sort of way. And so, I do think that there are instances in which people don't count as having acted freely, and that we should be responsive to that. But for the most part, I mean, to sort of, I think, sum up my view, I disagree with people like Robert Sapolsky, who thinks that our whole legal system is ill-founded because nobody's responsible for anything, and we shouldn't have any kind of retributivist system. I do think that people most of the time, or most people most of the time, have the capacities uh, that are required to ground free will and to hold them responsible for the choices that they make. And occasionally they don't, and it's important to understand when those cases occur. I think we need a much better understanding of the brain to really deal with hard cases. But yeah, so big picture, I think there are practical applications for the free will problem and coming to understand better what kinds of physical processes underlie the important capacities for free will be important in developing a more just uh, legal system, and as well as for things like medicine and uh, other
Mhm.
other elements of society. So
Yeah, yeah. You co-authored a primer on criminal law and neuroscience. Um,
with Stephen
Society,
Morse, yeah.
yes, with Stephen Morse. Yeah, yeah. Okay, so it's interesting. As society gets more complex, our ability to understand the effects of our behavior or our choices have like wide effects, have knock-on effects that go on and have potentially large implications. So, the causal influence of our actions may not be easily understood by an everyday person outside of an environment which they didn't evolve into, like, our ancestors in the African savannah. So as society gets more complex, and as there's multipolar issues going on all around the world, how do we stay on top if we're wanting to be responsible citizens?
Well, I think we're not doing a great job right now.
Yeah,
Um, so for this, I don't think you need very deep philosophy, um, but I think we need a renewed attention to education. I think we should be very cautious in what we do with AI. I think the idea of offloading cognition to something else is very, bodes very ill for us as a species.
do you
Learning
think
to
it like
think,
enfeebles us if we
yeah,
offload too much of our cognition onto an AI, then we're training ourselves not to think, in a sense?
yeah, I think that's right. I think too many people are being too happy to let something else make decisions for them instead of thinking through things. And I think that there's value in developing the kinds of skills that we have the capacity for. Um, and I see that really falling off, um, year by year as I teach my classes. Although maybe there's a glimmer of hope, because my most recent students seem to recognize this as a potential uh, failure of their education so far too. So yeah, I think we really need to be pretty vigilant about making sure that we don't get super lazy. And I also think that we're doing a terrible job in even dealing with the kinds of uh, consequences that we do foresee. I mean, uh, it's pretty obvious that the climate is changing and that we have a hand in that, and yet we're unable to do anything about it. Not unable, but I would say unwilling to do anything about it. Um, and one of the things that I think is an important uh, place to put some emphasis in the future is in developing what I call collective self-control. So think about the kinds of systems that an individual organism has for controlling its own behavior, and then sort of expand that to entire societies, or systems that are beyond the single organism. And it seems like what we are particularly bad at doing is structuring our social organizations in a way that they have the right kind of interacting parts to exert the kind of self control over the system as a whole that allows for that system to flourish in the future. So individual organisms have evolved ways of doing that within the organism that in general allows the organism to survive and reproduce. Well, we are doing I think, piss poor job at that at a macro scale, and yeah, I think I was I had written a draft of a paper on collective self-control some time back that was a little bit more optimistic, and all all recent signs have put me in a much more pessimistic mood. But I think we need to start thinking seriously about how societies should be organized in a way that prioritizes long-term thinking, and self-organization in ways that are conducive to long-term well-being as opposed to short-term gain, which is really all that seems to be going on right now. And so it is a, sort of expanding outward from looking at the structure of different kinds of organismic functions to thinking about the structure of humanity and human society as a whole.
Yeah, fantastic. I do recognize that I think one of your kids is brought a dog home or in the background.
Yes, the dog is. Can you want him to come say hello?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
I'll be right back. Come, Tubby. Would you like to be on a podcast?
Hello.
Here's-
Wow.
Oh,
Is that a St. Bernard? What
he's
kind of dog?
a Leonberger.
A Leon Burger. Wow, what a big, cuddly dog.
He is big and cuddly. Stop it.
Wow. What a beautiful. Oh, wow. I love dogs.
He's a good guy, but he doesn't like to be left alone for too long.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I was just thinking while you were saying all that, and I, recently had an event, and I was exploring in my talk, rather cautiously, mind you, but I did explore the notion of whether AI can be, and there's a lot to unpack here, but can be more moral than us. Now, there's obviously trade-offs. If we cede moral authority, or if we trust too much in an AI that isn't actually doing the right reasoning behind the scenes in its mind, if it's just doing massive pattern matching, once we reach, once it's faced with out of distribution or like circumstances that are not catered for in its training data, or it comes at counterfactuals that just pattern matching us isn't really adequate to be able to handle, then suddenly it might fail catastrophically at the edges of its competence, if you can call it competence.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, even if we did have the right sort of architecture where it wasn't just relying on just brute pattern matching across large data sets, that the AI would be able to do proper reasoning, symbolic reasoning and causal attribution and all that sort of stuff,
Yeah.
then we'd be in a position where we might be offloading this process of moral deliberation onto an AI such that we would lose a sense of what it is to be a moral actor, and just become, I don't know, bloated moral patients floating around on hoverboards, sipping Slurpee, like the end of Dali, if you've watched Dali, the movie,
I was
right?
gonna suggest that. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's a kind of enfeeblement we don't want to get, right? But if we do, if part of this collective action problem that we can't seem to be able to manage is manageable by something that's more moral than us, reliably more moral than us, then okay, well, maybe we should get AI to sort of help with that. but I'm hopeful if AI can, you know, reliably reason through things a lot more deeply, and with a lot more evidence-based sort of reasoning behind the scenes going on as well, then maybe it's a good thing as long as it allows us to sort of grow as well, in a sense that instead of us just saying AI, just do the right thing, AI should be going through we're talking about like very fastly smarter AI than we have now, of course, but then AI can help us get better as well through, helping us think through some of the problems instead of just giving us blanket answers as soon as we want an answer. Help us actually arrive at reasoned reasoned positions. Yeah. What are your thoughts about all that?
I guess I want to point out that the problem isn't that we're too stupid to know what we ought to do, at least in the, you know,
Mm-hmm.
the kinds of things I'm thinking of. It's that our systems are too weak to suppress bad actors. And so it's it's not that, or I don't think. Uh, Certainly, there are certain things that would be made better if we had a super intelligent system. Maybe we could devise, you know, less, more productive, less harmful ways of energy generation or increase food supply, or, there are certain things that would help. But the major issues are not that we don't know what to do, it's that we don't have the will to do it, or we don't have um, the will to do it for everyone. and
Mm-hmm.
um, and so it seems to me that the problems are more on the motivational
Yes.
side,
Yeah.
and the self, really the self control side, um, rather than the word, the intelligence side.
Mm.
And um, I so I think that it's a bit missing the mark to
Mm.
think like the reason we're in the position we're in is because we lack the intelligence.
Mm.
Um,
And that's the hard problem, I think, with AI is the motivation problem. I mean, the way I split things, in order for AI to be a moral actor that's worth its salt, is that, if it's really good at the cognition side, okay, it can reason through stuff. It's really good at assessing evidence. It can actually, it's strong enough, or it's more capable of acting in the real world at the moment. Even if AI knew everything about how to swim, if you threw the AI in a pool, it would drown, right?
right,
But
right.
also, it would have the motivation to do that.
Yeah, that's
Now,
the
what
AI
is that?
alignment part. Um,
Yeah.
but
There's the alignment to, yes. There's two sides of AI safety. One of them is control, and one of them is motivation.
yeah,
That's the way I look at it, and it's the way Nick Bostrom describes it in his book, Superintelligence. And control is about just either boxing it up, tripwiring it, giving it external sort of incentives like carrots and sticks. But the real problem, if you're going to solve the problem long term, you'd want to motivate it internally.
yeah,
But what that actually means is that, you just give it rules and hope for the best, or you domesticate it like you might domesticate like a dog, right? To, do its business outside, um, or you might do something more fundamental, that requires it to be motivated in a way that is, whatever it is that motivation actually does is actually implemented in the AI itself, rather than brittle sort of motivational methods.
yeah.
So yeah.
But that's a problem for humans as well, right?
Yes, except we can't change our own architecture, right? We've got what we
Well,
have.
But we can change our social, we can change the architecture of society within which we work.
Hmm.
And right now, what you're seeing is, at least in the United States, a reworking of the national architecture in a way that severely weakens the kind of controls that were instituted.
Hmm.
So it's going in the wrong direction.
Hmm.
Um, if we want something that seems like a free society, we're going to have to reinstate those controls so that, in fact, it remains a democracy instead of devolving into an autocracy.
Hmm. Hmm.
Um, but I think a serious look at what self-control and as you were saying, sort of morally motivated action looks like at a societal level is really uh, long overdue at this point. Um,
Yeah.
I
I
also need
wonder.
to. Oh, I need to tell you that I need to
Yeah.
catch a train in an hour, and I have not yet packed. So at some
Okay.
point, we're gonna have to
Yeah.
cut
Yeah.
off
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
discussion.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. True. Well, let's end by trying to circle this back to the free will part of it. So, I mean, we have actors in the world that seem to have insatiable desires, and their will is mostly focused on funneling whatever power they can get into servicing their desires, which may be just wanting more power.
right.
They do you think they have the freedom to be able to not do that?
Oh, yes, and I think they are entirely responsible for not doing that because they do have the capacities um, and choose to not exercise those capacities. Yeah, I think there's a large scale failure um, right now, uh, and there are ways in which those capacities could be and should have already been reined in by the proper operation of the rest of the system, and somehow that whole system has been eroded to the extent that it's not performing the function it was designed to perform. Um, so yeah, I think if you think about free societies, and I don't want to sort of make a one-to-one analogy between freedom in a society and freedom in an organism, but I think what you're seeing is the kind of society that was structured in a way that it had, um, sort of an internal system of balance and coherence and long-term goals for the benefit of the organism as a whole. um, I think that entire system is collapsing, or at least being eroded to the extent that collapse is um, maybe not imminent, but it can be envisioned in the not too distant future unless something is remedied. And you might think that that is a way that is going to be an erosion of a different kind of freedom, not freedom of the will, but where we started out, the kind of political freedom that is maybe the more ordinary way of talking about freedom. So, you think of this society as structured in such a way to ensure the political freedom of the many, and it is uh, losing its ability to do that.
Yeah, if you could get an ear of somebody up in a position of power at the moment, what would you say to convince them against, where the direction that America is taking at the moment?
Um, it's really hard to know if there's anybody in power who has any desire to listen to anyone speak about values,
Mm.
um, and a future that is, beyond their own lifetime. But if any of those people cared about those things, yeah, I think I would have them take a good look at uh, the kind of system that they're engineering and um, its ability to, with to I don't know, survive is not the right word, but flourish in the future, right? I think what I assumed governments were set up for was to ensure the flourishing of the nation as a whole, where I take that to encompass all of the beings that are making up that nation, and that's not what it's aimed at doing right now.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Indeed.
But I
Well,
think that, yeah, that I'll let it go at that, I guess.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, okay. I guess I should let you go. But just before you do, is there anything that any concluding remarks that you'd like to make that I'll put at the end of the video that people can sort of you know takeaway points? Oops. I think
Having
yes.
and oh, yeah. Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so Dan Dennett talked about free will worth having, and I'm very much aligned with him in that respect. I think um, it's not really worth talking about free will that is a conceptual impossibility, right? What we care about is free will that is a conceptual possibility, and then whether or not we have that. And I think one point that I'd want to make is that there's nothing that I've seen come out of the sciences and neuroscience in particular that provides any compelling evidence that we lack free will. Um, and I think that the best view of what free will is the kind of free will that can be uh, grounded in a vision that is not uh, tied specifically to the empirical truth of determinism or indeterminism, neither of which I think we're going to have scientific evidence for that, is compelling enough to answer that question. And so the compatibilist view that I offer, I think, is is a compelling one when you can kind of put the glasses on in such a way that you can see how it's possible that even if determinism might be true, you could still have free will. That's, I think, the free will worth having.
Awesome. Well, it's been so interesting, and it's such a fascinating topic. And since I've been researching for this interview, I think I've learnt quite a bit about myself, really,
Yeah.
about these concepts as well. But it's fascinating. It's really, yeah, it's certainly captivating topic, and I think it's really important. But thank you so much for spending
Yeah.
the time and energy, and you're doing great work. So please continue,
Thanks.
and I'll watch on and see and watch for any other stuff you do in the future, any future
Great.
projects that you're focusing on now that you want to just quickly do a shout out to.
I'm trying to work on a book on free will at the moment, but finding time to do it has been difficult. So it's moving less quickly.
Right. Do you have a title?
This is so frustrating with the connection.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, I guess
I,
I guess because you got to get a train soon, but let's just
I do.
yeah, yeah, let's just leave it there then. But yeah, looking forward to hearing or reading your book looking forward to hearing about and reading your book in the future when it does come out.
Great.
Thank-
I'll
yeah, so
let you
thanks
know
very much.
when that happens.
Yeah,
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 thanks
yeah,
for your
yeah,
time.
yeah,
And
yeah,
sorry about the connection. I don't know what to do about it.
yeah,
But
yeah.
how
That's
long
fine.
do you want me to not close this for a bit, right?
Well, I'll stop the recording.
Yeah.